Good morning, dear students of class 12. Welcome to the English online learning class. Today we are going to take up part 7 of the text of the lesson Indigo by Louis Fisher. So first let us do a quick recap of this lesson. As discussed earlier, this lesson is an excerpt from Louis Fisher's book, The Life of Mahatma Gandhi, which has been judged as one of the best books ever written on Gandhiji. The excerpt deals with a series of events as told by Gandhiji to Louis Fisher that urged Gandhiji to force the departure of British from India. It was in 1916 at the annual session of the Indian National Congress in Lucknow. A peasant, Rajkumar Shukla from Champaran, met Gandhiji during the annual session of the Indian National Congress in Lucknow and requested Gandhiji to visit Champaran and look into the condition of peasants there. Rajkumar Shukla was adamant, and Gandhiji was impressed by his tenacity and story, and finally Gandhiji agreed to accompany him to Champaran. Now, on way to Champaran, Gandhiji stopped in Patna to meet a lawyer, Rajendra Prasad. As Rajkumar Shukla took him to Rajendra Prasad's house, Rajendra Prasad, who was a lawyer then, but later he became the president of the Congress Party and president of India. At that time, Rajendra Prasad was not in the house, but his servants, as they knew Shukla, who used to bring the cases of the peasants of Champaran for legal advice to Rajendra Prasad, they allowed Rajkumar Shukla and Gandhiji, whom they considered to be another peasant, they allowed them to stay outside. But on condition, Gandhiji was not allowed to draw water from the well, as they thought Gandhiji was an untouchable. Now, on way to Champaran, after leaving Patna, Gandhiji stopped at Muzaffarpur so that he could have a better understanding of the problems of the sharecroppers. He contacted J.B. Kriplani, who met him at the station with a group of students. And he also stayed in the house of Professor Malkani, who was a government teacher, for 2 days. And he considers this as an extraordinary thing, as to harbor an advocate of home rule was something very daring, and people were scared, Indians were scared to give shelter to the advocates of home rule. But Malkani showed his daringness, and he allowed Gandhiji, he welcomed Gandhiji to stay in his house. Now, the news of Gandhiji coming to Champaran spread like wildfire. When in Muzaffarpur, Gandhiji was contacted by lawyers who discussed with Gandhiji the type of cases brought by the peasants of Champaran and the fees that they charged from them. Gandhiji was angry, and he chided the lawyers for cheating and for charging high fees from the peasants of Champaran. And he also said that law courts are of no use. When the peasants are so crushed and fear-stricken, law courts are useless. And the real relief for them is to be free from fear. Gandhiji also studied the land arrangement of Champaran, got complete information of the problems of the Indigo sharecroppers, as large farms in Champaran were owned by Englishmen and Indian peasants worked as tillers, as tenants, and the landlord forced all the tenants, the Indian peasants, to grow indigo in 15% of their land and surrender the entire crop as rent. But In the recent development, as synthetic indigo had been developed by Germans and the demand of Indian indigo fell in the world market, the British landlords tried to gain out of the situation and they forced the tenants to pay them compensation for releasing them from 15% arrangement. And this made the tenants unhappy when they came to know of the real situation. Gandhiji began by getting all the facts. When he reached Champaran, he was met with opposition from British landlords. When he refused to obey the orders of the British administration to return from his mission, he was given summons to report at court the next morning. He got mass support from the local peasants, which was beginning of the end of their fear of the British. The inability of the officers to control the masses resulted in the trial being postponed. Now, other prominent lawyers like Rajendra Prasad, Rich Kishore, Maulana Musrul Haq arrived in Champaran to support Gandhiji, and they were ready to court arrest in batches. This made Gandhiji remark, the Battle of Champaran is won, because he had united the lawyers and they were ready to fight for the rights of the tenants of Champaran, the peasants of Champaran. Gandhiji now received a letter informing him that the Governor General of the province had dropped the case. This was the first triumph, first victory of the civil disobedience movement. And on the orders of the Lieutenant Governor, an official inquiry was set up. Gandhiji asked for 50% money, but later he accepted 25% of the money offered by the British landlord to the farmers. Gandhiji felt money was not important, but it was significant that the British landlords had surrendered their prestige and the farmers had learned to fight for their rights. As a result, within a few years, landlords left their land and farmers became owners of their land. So we stopped at this point in the previous class. Now let us continue further with the lesson. Now part 6 we are going to do now. Now the Champaran episode, Gandhiji was able to give the peasants of Champaran their land back, and indigo sharecropping disappeared. He had sought a political solution to the problem of the people of Champaran. But his work did not end here. Gandhiji never contented himself with large political or economic solution. This was not his only concern. He was not satisfied with only giving the people a political and economic solution. He saw the cultural and social backwardness in Champaran village and wanted to do something about it immediately. As during his stay in Champaran, he saw that the place was lacking in cultural and social upliftment, and he decided to remove the cultural and social backwardness of the area. He appealed for teachers Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parekh, two young men who had just joined Gandhiji as disciples, and their wives volunteered for the work. So he invited other volunteers to come and work for the people of Champaran, Mahadev Desai and Narhari Parekh, who had become his disciples. Several more came from Bombay, Pune and other distant parts of the land. Devdas, Gandhiji's youngest son, arrived from the ashram, and so did Mrs. Gandhi. His wife also joined him, and his youngest son also joined him in serving in Champaran and removing the cultural and social backwardness of the area. Primary schools were opened in 6 villages. This was a requirement. Children need to be educated, and so primary elementary education needed to be imparted. Kasturbai taught the ashram rules on personal cleanliness and community sanitation. So this work of personal cleanliness and community sanitation awareness was given by Kasturbai. Health conditions were miserable. Gandhiji got doctor to volunteer his services for 6 months. 3 medicines were available: castor oil, quinine, and sulfur ointment. Anybody who showed a coated tongue was given a dose of castor oil. Anybody with malaria fever received a quinine plus castor oil. Anybody with skin eruptions received ointment plus castor oil. So basic medicines were given. Health care was taken up by the doctors with basic medicines. Gandhiji noticed the filthy state of women's clothes. He asked Kasturbai to talk to them about it. One woman took Kasturbai into her hut and said, "Look, there is no box or cupboard here for clothes. The sari I am wearing is only one I have." During his long stay in Champaran, Gandhiji kept long-distance watch on the ashram. He sent regular instructions by mail and asked for financial accounts. Once he wrote to the residents that it was time to fill in old latrine trenches and dig new ones, otherwise the old would begin to smell bad. So even ashram work was not neglected by Gandhiji. Small instructions were given. The Champaran episode was turning point in Gandhiji's life. What I did, he explained, was very ordinary thing. I declared that British could not order me about in my own country. But Champaran did not begin as an act of defiance. It grew out of an attempt to alleviate the distress of large number of peasants. This is what Gandhiji had decided, to remove the distress, the problems of the people of Champaran. This was typical Gandhi pattern. His politics was intervened with practical day-to-day problems of the millions. His was not a loyalty to abstraction, it was a loyalty to living human beings. He was serving human beings. That was his main concern. In everything Gandhiji did, moreover, he tried to mold a new free Indian who could stand on his own feet and thus make India free. So he was preparing Indians to be self-reliant. Earlier in Champaran action, Charles Freer Andrews, the English pacifist who had become a devoted follower of Mahatma, came to bid Gandhiji farewell before going on a tour to Fiji Islands. Charles Freer Andrews, who had become his follower, when leaving for Fiji Island, he came to meet him. Gandhiji lawyers thought it would be a good idea for Andrews to stay in Champaran and help them. Andrews was willing if Gandhiji agreed, but Gandhiji was vehemently opposed. He was strongly opposing this idea. He said, "You think that it is an unequal fight? It would be helpful if we have an Englishman as on our side. This shows the weakness of your heart. It only shows we are weak if we are taking support of an outsider. The cause is just. You must rely upon yourselves to win the battle. You should not seek a prop in Mr. Andrews because he happens to be an Englishman. We should know how to fight our own war battles." He had read our minds correctly, Rajendra Prasad comments, and we had no reply. Gandhiji in this way taught us a lesson in self-reliance. How to be self-reliant and fight for our own cause. Self-reliance, Indian independence, and help to sharecroppers were all bound together, and which helped the people of Champaran, and which also was a turning point in the history of our struggle for independence. So it set the pace. The Champaran episode, it was a turning point in Gandhiji's life and the struggle for freedom. We'll stop here, and if you have any doubts in the lesson, you are most welcome. You can post it in the WhatsApp group or in your Google Classroom. Thank you. Take care. Have a nice day.